My fingers went cold the moment I touched the black tie. Not from the morning air, though October in Dayton can cut right through you before sunrise. It was something else, something that had been sitting in my chest since the night my wife June passed. A kind of stillness that didn't feel like peace, felt more like waiting. I'd been standing in front of the bathroom mirror for 10 minutes, holding that tie, thinking about how June used to knot it for me. Every Sunday, 41 years. She'd stand on her toes because she was barely 5'3", and she'd tuck it just right, pat it twice on my sternum and say, "There, now you look like someone I married." I never learned to do it right without her. The memorial service was at 11. Her sister had arranged it, the 100-day ceremony, some tradition on June's mother's side that the family had kept going for 3 generations. I didn't argue. I just wanted to show up, be there, say goodbye, one more time in whatever form they needed me to. I finished with the tie crooked, probably, and went downstairs to get my coat. That's when the knock came. 3 short raps on the front door. I checked the clock on the microwave, 8:47 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. My son Kevin had called the night before to confirm he'd pick me up at 10:15. Kevin is practical that way. He calls ahead. He confirms. He was supposed to be a lawyer but ended up running a landscaping company, which I always thought suited him better. He likes things growing, not arguing. I opened the door. It was Loretta. Loretta Pacheco lived 2 houses down, on the corner where our street met Birchfield Lane. She was maybe 72, 73, and she'd been a home health aide for 30 years before she retired. For the last 8 months of June's illness, Loretta had come by 3 mornings a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. She helped June bathe, helped her with her medications, sat with her when the fatigue got too heavy and June just needed someone nearby who wasn't family and wasn't grief-stricken and could talk normally about ordinary things. Game shows. Her grandchildren. The price of tomatoes at the Kroger on Salem. June had loved Loretta. I hadn't seen her since the funeral. She'd sent a card, a casserole dish that I never fully defrosted, and a note that said she was thinking of me. I'd meant to call but hadn't. Grief has a way of shrinking your world down to a very small room, and I'd been in that room a long time. She was standing on my porch in her church coat, holding something against her chest. Not a casserole, a manila envelope. "I'm sorry to come so early, Bernard," she said. "I know what today is. I know you need to get ready. But I've been sitting on this for 3 weeks, and I couldn't let today happen without you knowing." I stepped back and let her in. She sat at the kitchen table, the same chair she'd always used when she came to check in on June, and she put the envelope down in front of her, but didn't open it yet. She folded her hands over it and looked at me the way people look at you when they're about to say something that changes the shape of a room. "It's about Diane," she said. "Diane, my daughter-in-law, Kevin's wife of 9 years. I sat down across from her. Loretta had been there the morning it happened. A Tuesday, 3 weeks before June died. Kevin was at work. I'd stepped out to pick up June's prescription refill from CBS, maybe 45 minutes, maybe a little more. When I got back, June was asleep, and Loretta said everything had been fine, quiet morning. But that wasn't the whole truth. Loretta set her hands flat on the table. "The morning you went to the pharmacy," she said, "Diane came over. She said she wanted to sit with June, give me a break, let me get some coffee. I went to the kitchen. I was gone, maybe 15 minutes. When I came back, Diane was coming out of the bedroom. She had her purse over her shoulder. She said June had fallen asleep. She kissed me on the cheek and left." Loretta paused. I didn't think anything of it at the time. But a few days later, I was helping June change, and I saw the folder. June had kept a blue accordion folder on the nightstand. I knew it. It was where she kept important papers, insurance cards, a list of her medications, some photographs she liked to look at. She'd been keeping it close to her in those final weeks. The folder was in a different spot, Loretta said, and one of the sections was open. I didn't go through it. It wasn't my place, but I saw enough to notice the papers were out of order. There was a document on top that I hadn't seen before. White paper, notary seal at the bottom. My stomach had already moved somewhere lower than it belonged. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what it meant, Loretta said. And then June passed and there was so much happening and I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I misremembered. But 3 days ago I saw Diane at the Walgreens on Wilmington Pike and she looked at me a certain way. You know how some people look at you when they're hoping you've forgotten something? That's how she looked. And I went home and I thought about it all night. And I couldn't come here yesterday because I needed to be sure I wasn't just being an old woman with an overactive imagination. She pushed the envelope toward me. I'm a mandatory reporter, Bernard. Even retired, some things you can't unknow. I made a call to a friend of mine at the county clerk's office. She owes me a favor. I asked her to pull the documents on file related to June's estate. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a document I had never seen. It was dated 6 weeks before June died. It was titled as an amendment to her existing will. In it, a significant portion of the estate, including the house, was directed away from the family trust and toward Diane individually. Not Kevin and Diane jointly, just Diane. The signature at the bottom was in June's handwriting, except that June had lost most of the fine motor control in her right hand by then. She'd been signing birthday cards with an X and a printed letter block. I had 4 of them in a drawer upstairs. There was a notary seal. The name on the seal was someone I'd never heard of. I sat there for a long time without saying anything. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment because it wasn't what I expected. I expected anger. I'd seen angry grief before. At the hospital, in the parking lot after the diagnosis, at the insurance company on the phone, all those places where helplessness comes out sideways. But what came up wasn't hot. It was cold and very clear, like the moment just before you make a decision you've been putting off for too long. Does Kevin know? I asked. I don't believe so, Loretta said. I don't think she's shown him anything yet. My guess is she was waiting until after the 100-day ceremony. Let things settle. Let you get a little further from it. That was smart. That was Diane's particular kind of smart. She'd always moved slowly, methodically. She was an accountant, had been since before she married Kevin, and she thought in spreadsheets, planned things out, backfilled her logic. I had always respected it. We'd had a decent relationship, not warm exactly, but functional. She came to dinners. She sent flowers when June got the diagnosis. She sat in the waiting room during the surgery. But she had also, I now understood, been in that room with June's papers and the woman whose name I was looking at in that notary seal. I looked her up on my phone while Loretta was still at the table, had no registered notary certification in the state of Ohio. I thanked Loretta. I held her hand for a moment. She told me she was sorry, twice, the way people say it when they mean it both times. Then she left, and I stood in my kitchen in my crooked black tie and tried to think clearly. The first person I called was my brother-in-law, June's younger brother, Philip. Philip had been a probate attorney for 30 years before he retired to Phoenix. He picked up on the second ring. I read him the language from the document while he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "Bernard, do not say anything to Kevin yet. Do not say anything to Diane. You are going to the ceremony. You act normal. After the ceremony, you come home and you call me back, and I will tell you exactly what to do next." That is the kind of clarity you need when the floor tilts under you. Kevin picked me up at 10:15, exactly when he said he would. He looked tired, the good tired, the kind that comes from caring about things. He'd been managing the ceremony details, the flowers, the caterer, the guest list, all of it. June would have approved of his flowers. She liked dahlias, and he'd gotten dahlias. Diane was already at the church when we arrived. She was standing near the entrance in a black dress and a pearl necklace I recognized as June's, one that June had said 2 years ago she wanted our granddaughter to have someday. I noted that. I smiled at her. I said, "You look lovely," because I had decided to be unreadable, and I am, when I need to be, a very patient man. The service was quiet and beautiful. The pastor spoke about June as though he'd known her for decades, which he had. There were photographs on a board near the altar. June at 23, June at our wedding, June holding Kevin as a baby, June in the garden last summer with dirt on her knees and her ridiculous sun hat, laughing at something I'd said. I don't even remember what I said. I wish I did. Afterward, there was a reception in the church hall. Casseroles, coffee, the kind of folding chairs that are uncomfortable enough to keep people from lingering too long. I moved through it the way you do, thanking people, accepting condolences, nodding at stories about June that I'd heard before and still wasn't tired of hearing. Diane stayed close to Kevin the whole time. That was also new. She tended to work a room independently. That day, she kept one hand on his arm. At 2 o'clock, as people began to filter out, Philip arrived. He had driven up from Phoenix 2 days earlier, quietly, at my request, after our call. He didn't announce himself. He walked in, got a cup of coffee, and sat down in the back row of chairs like he was just another family friend who come a long way to pay respects. He had brought a colleague with him, a woman named Judith, an estate and probate attorney who practiced in Montgomery County, whom I had spoken to by phone the day before. She sat beside Philip. She also had coffee. They both looked like people who had come to a reception and not like what they actually were, which was the reason I had spent the last 20 hours barely sleeping. I had also, the afternoon before, gone to the county clerk's office myself. The amendment to June's will had been filed 6 weeks before she died. The notary seal was fraudulent. Judith had confirmed this with one phone call. The person named on the seal had never held a notary commission in Ohio. The signature bore characteristics consistent with a guided or forged signature in the context of a terminally ill individual with documented motor impairment. That was Judith's language, not mine. Mine was simpler. Someone had put a pen in my wife's hand, or put her name on a paper without her hand at all. At 2:15, Judith approached the table where Diane was helping Kevin wrap up the leftover food, an oddly domestic scene, given everything. She introduced herself plainly. She said she was an estate attorney retained by the family. She said there was a matter relating to June's estate documents that required immediate discussion. She asked if Diane would step outside with her for a moment. Kevin looked up. He looked at me. I walked over and stood next to my son. Diane looked at Judith. Then she looked at me. I watched something move across her face, a quick rearrangement, like someone shuffling cards very fast. Then she looked back at Judith, and her voice, when she finally spoke, was perfectly level. I don't know what you think you found, she said. That's all right, Judith said. Why don't we talk about it? Outside the church, in the parking lot, with the October air coming in cold off the river and the last of the dahlias still bright on the reception table through the window, Diane heard everything. The fraudulent notary, the incompatibility of June's signature with her documented medical condition at the time, the fact that the sole notary witness listed had no verifiable presence anywhere, not at the address on the seal, not in any county records, not with the state licensing board. Kevin stood beside me the whole time. He didn't speak. He is, like I said, a practical man. He listened. Diane did not faint. I want to be clear about that because I'd half expected something dramatic, and she is not a dramatic person. She is methodical. When Judith finished, Diane stood very still for a long moment, her arms crossed against the cold, and then she said, very quietly, I want to call my attorney. Of course, Judith said. Kevin drove her home. He was white-faced and silent. Before he got into the car, he put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed once, hard, and didn't say anything, and I thought that was probably the right thing, because there wasn't anything to say yet. 2 weeks later, after the investigation that Judith and Philip had set into motion reached the county prosecutor's office, a subpoena was issued. A forensic document examiner reviewed the amendment. Her conclusion, the signature was produced while the signer was in a state of significant physical impairment, likely with manual assistance, or was not produced by the signer at all. There was also evidence, lifted from the metadata of the digital document used to produce the amendment that the file had been created on a laptop registered to an email address linked to an account Diane had used for business correspondence. The notary seal had been purchased online from a website that sold decorative legal supplies, not a real seal, a prop. Diane was charged with forgery, fraudulent execution of an estate document, and elder financial exploitation, a felony under Ohio law that carries a sentence of 2 to 8 years. She was also charged with obtaining property by deception. Her attorney filed motions. There were continuances. It moved the way legal things move, slowly and without mercy for anyone's patience. Kevin and I talked. A lot. More than we had in years, probably more than since he was in his 20s and still figuring out who he was and calling me at odd hours with questions I mostly couldn't answer. We sat on the porch with bad coffee and said true things to each other. About June. About how long you can live next to someone and not fully know what they're capable of. About how grief makes you want to believe the best of everyone nearby because you can't handle one more loss. He filed for divorce 4 months after the charges were filed. The fraudulent amendment was declared void by the probate court. June's original will, the real one, the one she'd signed in front of our actual attorney in his actual office, with her actual hand steady and her eyes clear, the year before she got sick, was restored as the governing document. The house stayed in the family trust. I think about Loretta a lot. I brought her dahlias from the garden. Some of the ones Kevin had planted for the ceremony took root in the side yard, which was unexpected. I left them on her porch with a note. She called me that afternoon, and we talked for almost an hour about nothing in particular, the way people do when they've earned a certain kind of trust with each other. I think about June, too. More than Loretta, more than Diane, more than any of it. I think about her standing on her toes to fix my tie. I think about the blue accordion folder on the nightstand and how she must have felt in those last weeks, too tired to fight, trusting the people around her. She deserved better than what nearly happened. I didn't save anything. I want to be honest about that too. Loretta noticed. Philip knew the law. Judith knew what to do. Kevin had the courage to hear it. I mostly just stood still and let the people who loved June and the people who knew what right looked like do what they came to do. But I showed up. I kept the tie on. I didn't look away. I think that counts for something. June would probably have said it counts for more than I give it credit for. She was usually right about those things. I've thought a lot about what made the difference in all of this. Not the legal outcome. That was Philip and Judith's work, not mine. Not even the evidence. That was Loretta's memory and her conscience. What I keep coming back to is something simpler and harder to name. Diane made a calculation. She looked at a grieving old man and a distracted son and a dying woman who could barely hold a pen, and she decided that the timing was right, that no one would look closely. That grief makes people want to believe things are what they appear to be, because the alternative is too heavy to carry on top of everything else, and she was almost correct. That's the part I can't shake. She was almost right. What she didn't calculate was Loretta. Not because Loretta is extraordinary, though she is, in the way that people who spend decades taking care of others quietly become extraordinary without anyone marking the occasion. She didn't have a legal obligation anymore. She was retired. She could have told herself she wasn't sure, that it wasn't her place, that she probably misremembered. That's not an unreasonable thing to tell yourself when you're 72 and you don't want to walk into a grieving family's kitchen and say something that might burn everything down. She had every excuse available to her, and she didn't use a single one. That's what I mean when I think about integrity. Not the grand version, not the kind that gets written about. The kind where you knock on someone's door at 8:47 in the morning because you made a promise to yourself somewhere along the way that you'd rather be wrong and say something than be right and say nothing. I spent a lot of years thinking I understood people. 41 years with June. 26 years watching Kevin grow up and build a life. 9 years of Sunday dinners with Diane. You think you know. You think proximity is the same as understanding. It isn't. Diane sat at my kitchen table and ate my food, and I didn't know what she was capable of. That's not a comfortable thing to admit, but I think the discomfort of it is worth sitting with, because the alternative, deciding that you can always tell, is the exact condition she was counting on. What I've come to believe is that the clearest thing any of us can do is stay honest about our own limits. I couldn't read Diane, but I could listen to Loretta. I could call Philip. I could stand still and let people who knew what to do it. There's a kind of intelligence in that, not brilliance, not cunning, just the willingness to say, I don't know enough to handle this alone, and I'm not too proud to say so. Kevin asked me once, a few months after everything settled, whether I was angry, not at Diane specifically, just in general, whether I was carrying it. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I told him I was sad more than angry, sad that June's last weeks had been touched by something like that without her knowing, sad that Kevin had built 9 years on something that turned out to be partially hollow. But anger takes a kind of energy I've decided I'd rather spend elsewhere, on the garden, on the phone calls I kept meaning to make, on sitting on the porch with my son and saying true things out loud. June used to say that how you treat people when no one's watching is the only honest autobiography you'll ever write. She meant it as encouragement, I think. A way of saying that the small choices accumulate into something real. Loretta proved her right. So did Philip. So did Kevin, in his quiet, practical way. I'm still learning to knot the tie myself. I still get it crooked sometimes, but I keep trying. That counts for something.